Hi everyone, welcome to Monday Match Analysis Classics. I'm Gill. Today's episode is a conversation with Alex Gruskin. He's the editor-in-chief at Cracked Racquets and the host of the Great Shot podcast. And we go over a match that means a lot to me, and quite frankly, it's a pleasure to talk about it 11 years later because it aged like fine wine. 2009 US Open Final, Roger Federer versus Juan Martín del Potro. Without further ado, Alex Gruskin. We're joined for the first time by Alex Gruskin, editor-in-chief at Cracked Racquets and host of the Great Shot podcast. Alex, how are you? Thanks for coming on.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure. Nice to do a home and home with someone. I feel like with sports out of the way right now, nothing to watch on television, do home and home podcasts. That's the new, doubleheader from baseball. That's the new, all of these different things. So it is absolutely a pleasure. How are you holding up? All is well?
I'm great. Yeah, that's right. I went on your show and we did the 2001 Wimbledon semifinal between Patrick Rafter and Andre Agassi. And we both had the same brilliant and completely out of the box idea to take this coronavirus halt and use it to go back and watch old matches. I mean, it's a crazy coincidence.
No, I think we're all thinking, and I know we were chatting beforehand. We have mutual guests lined up, mutual matches that we want to recap as well, because there are so many great matches in tennis's history. That's the best part about the sport. So many great individual performances to be celebrated. And of course, great minds think alike. So honored to, have that alongside of you.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into the 2009 US Open final between Federer and Del Potro. But first, I want a quick origin story on Cracked Racquets. I mean, give me a little spark notes here on how this started up.
Wow, I am flattered. So the real question for you to flip this is, am I allowed to swear or no? No, I'm just kidding. Don't worry, I will not be swearing for the story. But you and I similar aged, and so tennis for me has always been a big part of my life. And throughout it, growing up, I got to see some of the greatest, if not the greatest, players the sport has ever produced. Players like Serena Williams and Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal. You all know who the great players are. And so tennis has always been a part of my life. And I think what we all learn as tennis players is that there's a huge community of tennis playing nerds who all feel similarly about all of these past matches, who follow the week in, week out, day in, day out grind of the tour at a similar, just fanatic level. And so, for me, it was post-college, and we're recording this, I think, April 17th. It's about the 3-year anniversary of my club tennis national championship at Michigan.
Congratulations.
The over-under was I going to mention that 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in? I hope we hit the under. But after graduating, because I got to play club in college, and that's not varsity, but it's enough to get your fix. And, for me, as I was graduating, I was like, well, I'm still going to need tennis in my life. I was starting a real job, something outside of the field of tennis. And I was like, well, what can I do? And, 2017, it was still podcast mania. It was right before everyone had a podcast, but a little bit after, podcast was a niche thing. And so I figured, why not give it a go? And I remember, I saw a Chris Eubanks interview from the guys at Cracked Racquets, Dalton and Westhoff, who, similar ages to me. We grew up all watching the same things. And I was like, oh, what I wouldn't do to have a little bit of access to guys like Chris Eubanks, because I loved college tennis. And I called Dalton. I managed to fool him into thinking that I knew what I was talking about. And, 3 years later, just because for all of us, and yourself included, tennis traditionally, stuffy's the wrong word, but it's an old-aged media. A lot of the figureheads at the top of the game, while tremendously entertaining and informative, they're not young. They're people who have been around since the 80s, since the 90s. And so we thought a youthful perspective might be something that tennis fans would appreciate. We thought in-depth analysis of the college level through the pro level on a day-by-day basis might be something people have enjoyed. Jury's still out on whether they do or not, but we're still rocking and rolling, so we'll take it.
Hey, I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. Check them out, Cracked Racquets, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, because that's what you're supposed to say, and also YouTube. Okay. I don't think that it's wise to keep this, so when we were doing the 2001 semi at Wimbledon, we were trying not to spoil it. I almost don't think that's worth it here. This is 2009. It's Del Potro Federer in the US Open final. I'm going to assume most people know what the outcome was. So let's not worry too much about that. And I just got to ask, your gut reaction when you hear that match, the legacy of that match? What's the first thing that hits you?
Well, I think to myself, hey, I was a 14-year-old who watched this and just remember thinking, oh, someone beyond Federer can win. And that for me was the first time that 2009 series. And, sorry to do this, but this is the inner host in me. You go back to that season and you just have to think that was the first thing, it was just a fascinating year because now we have so many next-gen guys coming up the pipeline. Well, that season was, the previous generation, the Murray, the Djokovic generation, the Delpo and Berdych generation. They were working their way up the rankings as well. Andy Murray, number 2, in the rankings. Nadal, 3, Djokovic, 4. All of them 23 years old or less. And again, for Nadal to be 23 in 2009 blows my mind. But, it's guys like that and Delpo and Tsonga and Simone and Monfils. They're all on the front halves of their career. And when Delpo beats Federer, I just remember thinking to myself, oh, are we about to see a new wave of a bunch of different players who are all talented like Del Potro break through in the biggest moments? And, that was half of my reaction. The other half is, oh my God, a healthy Juan Martín Del Potro was just so talented. And, I have a bunch of what ifs for you that we can run through at the end, because that's the other thing you think about with this match is what if.
Naturally. And for me, this match holds a very special place in my heart because it's the first match I was live in the stands.
Really?
First ever live tennis match, and it's really been all downhill from there.
Well, it's interesting because one could argue, and I guess this gets into the background, and sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but, Federer, I think it was like 2,200 days since he had lost at the U.S. Open. He had won 6 in a row or was going for 6 in a row. And, he had owned New York. It was his scene. He was always the one winning. He was always the one who the crowd embraced. And in this match, watching the replay, and I remember thinking this at the time as well, it definitely influenced who I was rooting for. The crowd, I'm not going to say it leaned towards Delpo, but probably for the first time ever, it was a 50-50 match.
Okay, so here's what was going on.
Yeah, give me the scoop.
Well, I was on the scene, as a young reporter taking note of the crowd. I'll tell you what, there was actually way less Del Potro fans than Federer fans. The volume was 50-50, not the split. And it was interesting because it was almost a different kind of roar when the Del Potro fans celebrated. It was just it had a little bit more juice behind it, where Federer was more of a big Wimbledon clap almost, inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. So it's interesting you say that. I think the crowd actually played a factor in this match as well. But let's do a little bit. Let's go back to kind of setting things up, the context. You mentioned 2009, crazy year, lots of iconic matches. For Federer, loses the Australian Open final to Nadal. That match is well known as a great quality match, but also because Federer cried afterwards. Then you go to the French Open, and Nadal loses to Robin Soderling, and Federer wins his 4th. So now he has all 4. He wins the French Open 2009. Then at Wimbledon, another massive milestone. He beats Andy Roddick in the final, and now he's past Pete Sampras with 15. This was a massive year for his Grand Slam success.
It's a tale of two scripts as well, because you mentioned it, and there are always going to be 2 or 3, I should say, crying moments that stand out to me in tennis history. And what does that say about our sport? I don't know, but it means we all care very much. That's why we all embrace it with all of our inner being. But there was Murray when he loses Wimbledon in 2012. I'm getting closer. I cried during that moment, and it would, I'll always remember that. I'll remember Cilic crying in that Wimbledon final 2017, because our first Cracked Racquets podcast was after that Wimbledon. And then there's that Australian Open. And in 2009, just for some context of where Federer was at, and sorry for the shameless plugging, I swear this will be the only time I do it, but I've been looking at some of the 5-year primes for players on our mini break podcast. And, this 2009 season probably falls in the first year just outside of Roger Federer Federer's prime. You look at it, that '06 season when he goes 92-5, 16 finals and 17 events, wins 3 of the 4 majors, makes the final in the other one. '07, he does the same thing. '08, it's similar stuff. He ends up semifinals, finals, then wins the U.S. Open. That was '08. But then '09, the script is kind of flipped, because in that '08 Wimbledon, that's obviously the Nadal match where he beats Federer dramatically 9-7 in the 5th set. And then for Nadal to come out again and beat Federer in the Australian Open, that was the first time in Roger Federer's career where it felt like he had met an equal, where it felt like maybe there may be a younger generation that will surpass him. And then, of course, he just, he struggles through, I think, Indian Wells and Miami. He lost to Murray and Djokovic respectively. He actually loses a match to Stan Wawrinka early in the season and early in their careers. That never happened. But then Federer rips off that incredible run, like you said, right? Coming into this U.S. Open, you look at where he was and what his stats were at. I think it was something crazy, like he was 32-1 in his last, I think, 6 events or something. A Madrid title, French Open, Wimbledon, lost Rogers Cup quarterfinals, but it was 7-6 in the third to Tsonga. He wins in Cincinnati and, didn't steamroll, but fairly comfortably into that U.S. Open final. It was a tale of 2 scripts. And, it's so funny because we are 11 years later and Roger Federer is still competing for Grand Slams. But again, no spoiler alert, but after this match, given the way this season had gone, he felt vulnerable for the first time. But coming into that U.S. Open, after the streak he had been on, it was like, okay, maybe he's not. And so that invincibility was still somewhat surrounding him at the '09 U.S. Open, significantly less so afterwards.
Yeah, it was a bit of a turning point, and he did. Now we're jumping way later. I mean, he did win the 2010 Australian Open, which is another legacy of this match. This almost, wow, that could have been the Roger Slam. He could have had 4 in a row if he had gotten this done. First of all, by the way, take the crying theme and put it in the back pocket. I'm bringing that back later. I'm telling you, I'm bringing that back. Okay. But I mean, Federer, you're right. He's in the crux of his dominance. He has won 5 straight U.S. Opens. Interestingly, because this would never happen nowadays, 5 different opponents. Del Potro was his 6th different opponent in the finals in as many years. So that was interesting. And the head-to-head at the time was 6-0 Federer. Federer was world number 1. Federer beat Del Potro straight sets in Australia, dropping just 3 games. But Del Potro did push him to 5 in Paris. This is after Nadal had lost in the semifinals. Federer had to come back from 2 sets to 1 down. Delpo is a player who had only lost really 1 match all summer. He was red hot. 17-1 since Wimbledon. Del Potro won the Rogers Cup. So even though Federer was really king at this time and did have that cloak of invincibility, Del Potro was a dangerous opponent, 20 years old at the time.
Yeah, and he's a healthy Juan Martín Del Potro. There are no wrist surgeries, no torn ACLs. This is a guy who was the number 3 junior in the world and had played like it throughout his early pro career. Again, he was 20 years old, as you mentioned, and he had already ascended the rankings. I think number 6 coming into the event, number 5 by throughout the year. He had reached his career high of number 5 for the first time. And as you mentioned, he had started to do well at the slams for the first time in his career as well. You look at that '09 season, starts out, '08, he made the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open, continues that momentum, quarterfinals at Australia, semifinals in the French Open. The Wimbledon performance wasn't great, but he immediately rebounded after that to have this incredible hardcourt summer. You throw in the fact that he was quarterfinalist Indian Wells, semifinalist at the Miami Open. By 2009, what's crazy is that he had asserted himself already as a top 10 ATP hardcourt player. And to be his size, 6'6", we all know it now, but that forehand, as electric then as it is now, and just the way he puts his whole body into that momentum. And we'll talk about it throughout the duration of the match, but he's a guy who can actually line up with Federer shot for shot, firepower for firepower. He's not intimidated. He thinks he can hit Federer off the court. I also think it's worth mentioning that in 2008, Djokovic did beat Tsonga. in that Grand Slam final. And so while Federer did still have that cloak of invincibility, as we've mentioned, someone had won that wasn't Federer or Nadal. Someone had broken the streak. And of course, we didn't know what Novak Djokovic was going to become. But, Murray made the final of the 08 US Open, and now Delpo was making it again here. It wasn't unheard of, as nearly as unheard of as it was when Medvedev made the final last year, for a guy like Del Potro to make the final in 09. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the way he dusted Nadal in straight sets, fewest games Nadal's ever won in a semifinal, he was rocking and rolling.
That was 6-2, 6-2, 6-2. It was the third time Del Potro had beaten Nadal that year. And that can't be neglected as the number one reason why, if you were nervous as a Federer fan, it was mostly because of what Juan Martín had just done in the semis. Now let's get to the match.
Okay, so sorry to do this. Sure. This is, again, the inner host in me. But in terms of before the match, I do think it's important to note, in the semifinals, this was the year Federer hit the iconic tweener against Djokovic. And so, that match against Djokovic was really good. I know it was a straight set win for Federer, but, 7-6, 7-5, 7-5, that's, against Novak Djokovic, that's a physical match. It was also held, I believe, on Sunday because there was a rain delay. And so the final got pushed back to Monday for the second year in a row. And I do remember there being a storyline at the time of, is there always going to be a Monday final now? Is that something we're going to have to worry about because it was 2 years in a row? And of course, we're all so reactive. But you do have to wonder physically, especially as we get into the match, how much did that take out of Roger Federer the night before?
Yeah, that's a good point. And Federer was looking pretty spry for most of that, but we'll get into the reasons why what went down. What went down. Let's start with the production, though. I always like to start with the production. Yeah. This is CBS. We have Dick Enberg, the late great Dick Enberg, in the middle. On his left, Mary Carrillo. On his right, John McEnroe. Any general notes on the CBS production, who, by the way, doesn't broadcast the U.S. Open anymore, as ESPN now has the rights?
Yeah, so first 5-set final for them since '99. They were excited about that. They had clips ready to go. I forgot that tournaments used to give away cars to the winner, the Lexus convertible shot. Always a fan of that. We talked about it when we did the 01 Wimbledon. That was probably McEnroe pitching a 9 out of 10, maybe a 10 out of 10 performance. This was probably a 7 out of 10 because him and MC were clicking. And, Mary Carrillo, always so great. But I feel like Mary Carrillo didn't get enough words in. And that's, again, a McEnroe theme that we don't have to touch. But I would have loved to hear a little more Mary Carrillo. That being said, Dick Enberg in the box, setting the scene. At one point, he goes, for those of you tuning in that aren't traditional tennis fans, Federer might be considered one of the greatest ever, so it's worthwhile to watch. I was like, really? In 09, we still had to make that little disclaimer? I don't think that's true. But so while McEnroe's performance diminished, having these three in the box was exceptional.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We all miss Dick Enberg. And by the way, Carrillo and McEnroe grew up together. Some, Queens natives, but a little bit of friction there between McEnroe and Carrillo, which is McEnroe. And I did further research because it came up on my last show with Amy Lundy talking about Clijsters and Serena, this very tournament, 2009 US Open, where they had a couple of tense back and forth. So I went back and I looked, and it turns out McEnroe made the claim, and let's not get into this, but McEnroe made the claim that Mary Carrillo is less qualified to call a men's match, and he said, I'm less qualified to talk about a women's match.
That's McEnroe at his finest.
Yeah, and Mary Carrillo didn't take too kindly to that. I don't blame her.
No, should we talk about the fact this was the tournament? I mean, we don't have to, but this was the Serena gets the point penalty against Clijsters tournament. This was the Melanie Oudin tournament. Like, that is 11 years ago. I remember that so vividly. That might be the thing I remember most about this U.S. Open, outside of who ended up winning it. Clijsters, of course, first mother, I think, since Gulagongs to win a slam as well. But crazy 09 U.S. Open.
Iconic. Yeah. All right, we're not hitting tennis balls yet. We got to start with this pre-match interview.
Perfect.
Okay, because Juan Martín del Potro looks like he just stepped off of a roller coaster, or he had just watched a horror movie. Was that not the vibes you were getting from Del Potro? He looked so terrified.
It was just, he spoke maybe 6 words. And again, a 20-year-old Juan Martín Del Potro from Argentina, that he spoke English as well as he did is something to be applauded. But no, he was nervous, and you see it in the way he comes out of the gate. I believe Federer breaks him right off the bat. Yeah, you could just tell he wasn't moving well. He was shanking balls. He was not, and he says like 3 words. He's like, I have to play everything perfect, even better than he did against Nadal. And, you texted me, go check that out. And I was like, this is incredible. But how about Federer's performance? That might be the peak of cocky Federer.
Federer was smirking, grinning, smooth talking. I mean, he looked. I mean, if Del Potro had just come out of a horror movie, where did Federer just come out of?
Yeah, it's crazy. He's like, Del Po's got nothing to lose, and it's like, really, you're going to say that about your opponent before the match? That's bold.
Yeah. Yeah, Del Po even admitted it. He said, I'm a little nervous. I think that's the first thing he said. And then McEnroe commented, wow, he looked really wound up in that interview. As you said, it manifested itself right away in the first set. Federer broke at love 1. By the way, the point of the match might have been in the second game of the match where Federer hits a 2-shot pass where he's way outside the doubles alley on his backhand wing, and then Del Potro half volleys it into the open court. Federer runs, and this is an exact CBS metric, 43.5 feet to track this next forehand passing shot.
And don't you love how they show like each of the spots Federer made contact with as well? That was one of the highlights. You're like, you really needed that? You couldn't just leave a little dot there? I feel like that's what we've moved on to now. But yeah, what first strikes you about this match in Roger Federer's performance, especially through the first 3.5 sets, maybe really the first 2.5 sets, is just how quick he was, how good he was defensively, how if you gave him any sort of forehand sitting up, which Del Potro did at the beginning because, as we mentioned, he was nervous, he just put it away or he moved forward. And yeah, the cross-court pass on the run, and at that moment you just thought, uh-oh, especially because he broke for 2-0, he held for 3-0, 40-15, a couple of big forehands. It just looked like it was going to be another day at the office.
True, but at the same time, I feel like Del Po's nerves kind of spotted Federer a set here. His feet weren't moving. He didn't have the forehand or the timing on his forehand. And the other tactical take that I had after this first set is Federer was moving forward really well. He got more short balls than he did for the rest of the match. But because Del Potro is a flat hitter, especially off his forehand wing, and his forehand wasn't really firing exactly either. Federer was really good at approaching Del Potro's forehand, was 10 for 10 at the net at one point.
Yeah, I thought, not that the first set was highway robbery. I think the third set for Federer was absolutely highway robbery. But, you look at the serve percentages. Del Po was at 54% of his first serves, and that's never going to get the job done against Roger Federer, except for the fact that Roger Federer was at 41% of his first serves were going in, and he couldn't find any rhythm. And I do think part of that was, and McEnroe points this out, which is again why he was pitching like the 7-8 range, not the 4-5. But Federer was playing fast. He could tell, he sensed the moment, maybe physically he knew what was going on with his body, but he had Del Po down. Del Po was nervous. He couldn't find any rhythm. Federer was getting to the line as quickly as possible. He was moving forward as quickly as possible, trying to just put the pressure on Del Potro. Now, tactically for Del Potro, he was 6 to 10 feet behind the baseline that entire first set. And that to me was another big tactical adjustment he made, because coming into the match, Del Po had made 82% of his returns in the tournament. And 82% of your returns, that's outstanding. And again, to see him hit two-handed backhand returns, you just think to yourself, oh, like, what were we robbed of? And him stepping into backhands, he's perfectly comfortable playing his backhand anywhere around the court. But everything was just tentative, and he was making returns, but just not doing anything with it. And again, if you gave Federer a middle forehand during this time period, he was on top of it. I mean, I'm looking at a chart, the match charting from tennisabstract.com, and they do the best, deep dive statistical looks at
Yes.
all of these different things. You look for Federer in terms of the points he played that were, the 1 to 3 shot range. I mean, he was so good on them. And I think it was something like there were 203 total points. 111 of them were on Federer's serve, and he won 111 of them on his serve, yeah, and he won 81 of them. That's a 73% conversion rating. He was getting +1 balls, he was moving forward to the net, and he was winning those points.
Del Potro being back is another reason that Federer had so much success approaching the net. I think Del Potro felt like he needed the extra time because that's how slow his feet were moving. That's why I think he couldn't get up there, because nerves can affect footwork, and I think that happened in the first set. First set, 6-3 Federer. Second set, more of the same. A stinker at love all. Del Potro is serving. 2 unforced errors, a double fault for love 40 at 15-40, another double fault for Del Potro.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was shaky.
Right. And to me, he looked kind of miserable. And I have a bit of a hot take about how he stopped looking miserable, or when he stopped looking miserable. Federer goes around the back after an easy hold by Del Potro. Del Po puts away the volley. But the ball winds up in Del Po's hand, or no, he might take a ball out of his pocket, and he throws the ball at Federer because it was like, how dare you almost pull off this incredible trick shot on me? And I just think he got out of his funk, his emotional funk, and just from that playful moment that he had with Federer.
Yeah, so great take as always. I think the origins of it, there was a game in that first set. I think it was the 5-2 game where Del Po goes down love 40, ends up hitting a couple of big serves and gets a couple of big +1 forehands to hold for 5-3. And it was kind of like, okay, I'm surviving then. But yeah, for Federer at this point in his career, he was 167-4 after winning first sets in majors. And, the last 16 U.S. Opens had been won by the guy who won the first set in singles. So, yes, certainly at that point, everything was rolling for Federer. But I also do think Del Potro could take some solace in the fact that he just didn't play that well in the first set, that nothing was working, and he just hadn't found his rhythm. And I know, as you mentioned here in this game, Federer played some solid points, but Del Po tracks down a bad drop shot before that to get, to have the forehand put away. That Fed goes behind the back. And, it certainly started to loosen him up. Yeah, that's why I think it's a really good take. I think you see immediately in the game after, he doesn't break, but he comes awfully close. Yeah, he gets, I think, 3 break points. They also have, their first conflict there where they decide to replay the point because Del Po thought, I think something came flying out of the crowd. And again, you were there, so maybe you remember, was there a cup coming out of the crowd at that time? But, I think that's a really good take, that he just needed something to loosen him up, to remind himself, hey, this is just a tennis match. I know it's a Grand Slam final, but yes, a little joking moment like that. And it's funny because things get tense between them later on. And, it's easy to joke around if you're Federer when you're up a set in a break and you're like, yeah, whatever. But evidently, maybe he should not have.
Yeah, better mood for Del Potro after that moment. Now, the timing on the forehand, it still wasn't there, especially when we saw what happens when he does time his forehand well later on in the match. At 1-3, I'm just going to highlight, and in post-production, I'm going to put this moment up. I think one of the more underrated misses of the match is at 1-3, add-out break point for Federer, and he has a look at a forehand that he tries to take inside in. I don't have that written down, so that's
no.
Remember.
So I'm smiling so widely because I literally in my notes add out inside in forehand miss for deuce, parentheses, capital letters, could be a big miss. Yeah, spot on. That's exactly when it happened.
And now we'll jump ahead to 5-4. Federer is serving for the set, and man, he is not making first serves still. First set, second set, still not making first serves, but it looks like he's going to go up 2 sets to love. In your view, what happened here at 5-4?
Well, he also had a breakpoint chance the game before, and he sort of missed a forehand pass in the net tape. So again, that's another blown point. And if he goes up 2-0, this is a completely different match. But for Del Potro, again, yeah, I thought he had been working the lob quite a bit as a passing shot early on in that first set. Maybe it's because Federer crowds the net so tightly, but there was a moment that I think it's in that 4-5 game. There's a long rally. Federer goes up to 30-love, as you mentioned. There's a long rally then with a backhand slice error from Delpo, or from I think Fed for 30, or Delpo for 30-15, or maybe not. And Federer approaches with a trip, and Delpo hits the bump lob over his head. And you can see, and the commentators say it, but you can see Federer's thinking to himself, do I go for the tweener here? Do I make this my iconic moment? And he doesn't do that. And, he tries to do the over-the-shoulder, lob, and it ends up going long. And I do think that was a moment when Federer sort of lost his head. When or not lost his head, that's the wrong word, but it was just sort of one of those moments where he thought he let himself get caught up by the grandeur. You could tell the over the shoulder was rushed. He really wanted to hit a tweener and he didn't. And that speaks to he let the pageantry get into his head. He thought to himself, hey, I've got this match. I'm on top of Del Potro. And, it just didn't look, and because Delpo wasn't playing well. But again, that was another one of those little moments, much like Delpo throwing the ball at the net, where he sort of calmed down and you could see Delpo, begging the ball, trying to push it out, just go long. Don't let him make an over the shoulder lob on me. And, from there, obviously, there is the forehand pass and there's the, the call that Federer doesn't like. And, I know you want to get into that, I'm sure, but that was it was just a confluence of events where he let the scene get to him, and then a call didn't go his way, and then before he knew it, it was 5-all.
Yeah, so 30-all is a point that a lot of people remember, and I actually went to Twitter and asked my followers, "What do you remember from this match?" And one of the replies was, "This forehand is what I remember from this match." 30-all, Del Potro's on the run. He's way behind the baseline and just absolutely demolishes this forehand. Looked wide, but chase review, it nicked the line. But Federer this was a point in his career where he did not trust Hawkeye. I'm so glad he got over that because I think it was fairly ridiculous, but it bothered him.
Yeah, no, and the thing was, it's not just that it was Hawkeye, it was that he was already upset with the line judge about the blown call earlier, or the delayed challenge, or not delayed challenge, but the blown call, the replaying of the point when Delpo wasn't ready. And, to get passed down the line once on an on-the-run forehand, you're like, all right, whatever, good for you. But to have it happen to him twice in a row, happens on the 30-all point as well as the 30-40 point, just ridiculous quality passes. McEnroe says on the call, it must be the biggest shot of Del Potro's career. And that's not hyperbole. That's absolutely correct. And again, that was the first time where the crowd really erupted for Del Potro. And they thought to themselves, okay, we've got ourselves a match.
Yeah, that was it. Big fist pump from Del Potro, 2 forehand winners in a row. The crowd's into it, and Federer is still thinking about the point at 30-all because he's looking at the ball mark and he really thinks that it was out.
What did you think? I thought it was in. Looking at the replay, and they slow it down. It's not as great as things are now, but it's still pretty good. That ball did look like it clipped.
I don't think I paid attention. I think I listened to the Hawkeye because I trust it, unlike Federer. But I'm glad to see that you're checking the Hawkeye with
my Hawkeye.
Eagle up.
It was, yeah, exactly. Yeah, up the hawk for the eagle. And it looked like it landed in. But yeah, you could just tell. And that was the moment where Delpo found his range. From there on in, I think he was the better player. And I know he dropped the third set, and we'll talk about that in this confluence of events that lead to it. But, Federer was wounded because Delpo holds at 15 for 6-5. And, I thought it was interesting because in that game on the deuce side, twice Delpo serves out wide to the Federer forehand. And Delpo just wasn't afraid. In his head, the way he takes balls early, Federer could unload a forehand, and Delpo's just like, nice, I'm going to unload this one even harder. And he'll go plus 100 miles per hour on that side. And, just slowly but surely, he began to crack Federer. Federer had to do so much scrambling through that first set in 3 quarters. And, for him to not close out that set and not even get to a set point, that didn't happen to Roger Federer in 2009. He lost to Nadal on clay, but that was Nadal on clay. Moments like this, he would always come out on top, and to have a call go against him, to have, these ridiculous on the run passing shots go against him. And, again, another tidbit for 2009, this was the year he cracked a racket in Miami, right? And, we're the cracked rackets guys. So, hey, great shot to him. But he got flustered, and that never happened during that stretch of time.
Yeah, Federer was it lingered, as I think Dick Enberg said, and at 5-6 comes away with a very tight hold, only made one first serve in that game. Then in the tiebreak, it's a pretty clean tiebreak by these two. The mini break comes at 3-all when Federer shanks a routine forehand. Credit to Del Potro, now riding the energy. He really didn't make any mistakes. And as we see with Novak Djokovic, a lot of the times in the end, in the tiebreak, it comes down to that unforced error.
No, although he did blow that overhead at 6-3.
Oh,
right?
You're right.
It was the set point.
Yes,
And, it was on. Yeah, it was on Federer's serve, and I think Mary Carrillo compares it to the missed Roddick volley from Wimbledon, and that's funny. But for a second you're like, oh no, he might actually get tight. But there were in between. They played 2 tie breaks, one in the second set, one in the fourth set. 1 mini break in each breaker. These guys were holding serve in the biggest moments. Delpo's, his serve percentage went up throughout the match. His serve mile per hours went down. But in the biggest moments, he was able to find a big serve and a big forehand. And, that's why Federer, you could tell, was a little bit upset with himself, because he's like, oh, I might have blown this opportunity.
Good set point by Del Potro at 6-5. Federer chipped the return cross court. Delpo got around it and hit a really strong inside-out forehand winner. Ultimately, Del Potro just rode this wave of energy after breaking to save the set. His forehand started dominating, and he just had the intensity in his feet was so much better by the end of the second set.
It's so funny because that inside-out forehand has become a staple of his game, right? That's the pattern you think of, especially now that he slices so many backhands and tries to get around them. But that's not the case in this match, and that's why I want to point out, why that forehand was so particularly impressive, because through the first 2 sets, yes, Delpo, of course, was running around his backhand to hit forehands, but primarily he was pretty comfortable playing the backhand, trying to take that ball early or trying to take it down the line, and I think Federer gave him a lot of trouble slicing that ball and getting Del Potro dipped on that side. In sets 3, 4, 5, Delpo starts running around that ball, starts hitting the inside-out forehand, the inside-in, setting up all of the forehand patterns he wants. And that gets back to the point you made, that Delpo's feet start moving, that he really gets himself into this match. And, yeah, he had 25 unforced errors, I think, in set number 2, but they were better unforced errors in the first set. And those unforced errors become forced winners forced errors from Federer later on down this match.
Yeah, there's a couple of tactical points that we can come back to. Did Federer use the slice backhand enough in this match? And just the strength of Del Potro's backhand at this time. I'm sure once we get into what happened with the injuries, we'll talk about what the difference is now. In the third set, Del Potro at 3-all takes his first lead of the match, gets the break. Federer breaks right back. Finally, Roger's first serve is starting to come on a little bit stronger. And at this point, the highlight of the third set, before we get to what happens at the very end, is Del Potro challenges way after a game point that Federer had thought he won, and you have a somewhat iconic argument with the chair umpire. And it's another reply I got when I asked, what do you remember about this match? Someone said, that argument.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it happens in the 4-all game, or so that 9th game of the set. And I mean, I have the quote written out here because it's so rare you get to catch Federer on camera like this. And again, now he's a little edgier. He gives, he'll rip on people on social media, all of these different things, but that's not the Federer of 2009. And, the CBS broadcast has to cut away because they catch him on mic swearing. And, it's also very clear, because I'm a body language doctor, as you know, I can read mouths, read lips, and know what people are saying. And he dropped an F-bomb to the line judge. Like he says, I don't give a bleep what you say. And then he says, are you effing? And then he goes into the point and they cut away. But, it's because Delpo got in Federer's head. He got under his skin. He breaks, he had broken him 4-4-3 in that prior to that. And I know Federer broke back, I think, right away 4-4 all and then holds for 5-4. But the match was starting to get away from him. Delpo repeatedly had break points. You look at the match stats for this match, and I think it's something like Federer ends up with, I think it's like 25 break points, something like that. In the end, you look for Del Potro, he has 20, or sorry, it was 22 break points for Federer, 15 for Del Potro. But I think something like 15 of those break points came in the first two sets. And, so for Federer, even though he ends up stealing the third set, spoiler alert, to me, it did feel like he stole it from Del Potro, who just got a little nervous at the end.
Totally. I think Del Potro was at a high level in a dogfight, and then it was almost, I don't want to call it a relapse of the first set because it was so momentary, but things got tense at 4-5, a net cord that Fed gets at love 15. Now, Del Potro missed a high volley on the first ball that he should have made. That makes it love 30. Then he gets back to 30 all. Delpo, it's a forehand winner, inside out, inside in, service winner at 15-30. But from 30 all, 2 double faults from Del Potro, it was shocking.
Yeah, I mean, look, you talk about in that 4-all game. I don't know. I think he may have had Delpo. I think he did actually have a break point in that game. It was a ridiculous cross-court forehand from Delpo, then a ridiculous down the line by Delpo where he was outside the alley and just overwhelmed the Federer one-hander 4-30-40 now.
Yes.
Of course, Federer ends up getting out of that game, and of course, that's when he gets chippy after getting out of that game with the line judge. But that love 15 point in the 5-4 game when Delpo missed that high volley, Federer lets out a come on, like an audible come on. And Roger Federer does not cheer for opponents' unforced errors. That's just not how unless he's playing Djokovic. That's just not how he is. But he did that in this match. And it's just like, again, it's so interesting because he had gotten to slam number 15 at Wimbledon. He had completed the career Grand Slam at the French Open that season. And yet 2009 is a visibly frustrated Roger Federer on court, which was different. And I do think, for him, he got lucky to steal that second set. You mentioned the net cord. You mentioned the back-to-back double faults. Delpo lost the set. Federer didn't win it.
I think that's fair. Do you have any theories why Federer was visibly frustrated in 2009, as you said? Any theories there?
My mom's an OB-GYN. I know a little bit about what it's like to be around little kids, and he had just had a set of daughters, and so adjusting to, not saying that it's their fault, that is not what I'm implying, but of course life for him gets a little more complicated, and of course Nadal was peaking, coming up on the rise, and so were Murray and Djokovic, and no one is more astute than Roger Federer as to the level of the competition he faces. But yeah, it was also windy too, right? They kept referencing how windy it was. And again, this is where I want to. Yeah. So is that just a product of ash? And again, to ask you what the wind conditions were on a Monday in 2009, that's just unreasonable. But because the balls didn't look like they were really swirling, but there were a lot of mishits. And I just think he just wasn't happy with his serve. He wasn't happy with his, the calls that were going against him. He just wasn't happy.
That's just how Arthur Ashe was before pre-roof. Now players have other complaints, like it gets too hot and humid, but pre-roof, it was this vacuum. I don't know. I don't even know it's not geometry. Who would know about this? Whatever it was a wind tunnel, and the wind swirled inside, and it was frustrating for players. One thing, though, that I didn't realize because I was at the match is that TV did not show Del Potro at the changeover between the third and fourth set. And I had this notion that everyone knew how much emotion Del Potro showed at that changeover. And now I realize that most people have no idea.
Is this about to be the crying part 4? No way. Were there tears on the changeover?
It looked like there were some tears. Now, here was the moment. here was the moment. And I know this is insane. It blew my mind. I was waiting for the moment on the broadcast when the fourth set started. I was waiting for them to say, and by the way, this is what happened at the changeover. And they did not show it. So here I am thinking that everyone knows about this. And it turns out this is a Monday Match Analysis exclusive. But here's how I remember it. I mean, Del Potro has his hands buried in his face, and it's up on the Jumbotron at Ash. And when he just removes his hands, he's teary. I mean, he is distraught about how that third set ended. And I remember the reaction of the crowd was, "Aw."
No, so first of all, thank you for that piece of insight. And maybe McEnroe was in there saying, hey, I'm not qualified to talk about people crying since I've never cried on a tournament match before. And it's like, well, actually, you probably have, John. He got salty when they showed a photo of him early on, or he got like passed at the end. He was like, that's the clip you're going to show of me. And then in that third set, they end up showing a clip of shirtless John celebrating something. And so I just imagine between, between catching Federer swearing on mic, and by the way, the exchange between McEnroe and Carrillo when they come back is just priceless. But they were just like, hey, do we talk about the tears too? Do we just really go all in? And they were like, no tears. Like just move on. Let's get to the next thing. Let's try and remind everyone why tennis. And it's so sad because the individual personalities of tennis, how heartfelt a loss is, because it's all on you as a player. You're the one who plays the match. That's what makes the sport so enjoyable, those intimate moments you get to see as a fan. And so, yeah, that's fascinating. And it also makes me wonder, is that the sort of moment, two double faults, and, moving forward, McEnroe emphasizes that it looks like after those double faults, Delpo takes some off of his serve, but he also starts to play so much more freely from the baseline. And you have to wonder in that moment, especially now knowing the emotion, was that when he just said, you know what, I really don't have anything to lose. I have played better than Roger Federer through these last two sets at least. And I think that's fair for him to have said. And I just let it get away from me. And it was just so interesting because, yes, I think Federer has some break in this set. He had some break chances, never any match points, but certainly some chances to take a lead. And then, Delpo ends up going up, I think, 4-3 a little bit later. But yeah, the Delpo you see in set 4 and set 5, that's a guy who, this gets to the whatever, I'll save it, but it's just a special performance.
The forehand just
Fire.
Jumps off the screen in this fourth set. The two exchange breaks a little bit. At one point, when Federer gets a break back midway through the set, it's actually a moment where Federer has tons of momentum and tons of energy. At 4-5, Del Potro serving at 4-5. I think he has his moment, another moment where he really takes control of this match. He's in a 15-30 hole. And as you said, Alex, he had been serving his first serves, Del Potro, between 115 and 100 miles per hour, really taking off, just putting them in the box and relying on his forehand to really be his first serve, so to speak. But at 15-30, suddenly 128 by Del Potro, service winner. 30 all, 131, an ace. And at 40-30, massive forehand winner down the line. That game to me was massive.
See, for me, I go back to that second game of the fourth set, and Federer races out to a 15-40 lead. There's some great defense. There's just a sloppy drop shot from Delpo, a missed inside in forehand +1 ball, and his footwork went back to that level that it was in the first set. And you go down 15-40, you go down a break to Roger Federer 2-0 after being down 2-1. That could be lights out. But from there, it's a serve +1 for 30-40, a serve inside plus an inside-out forehand for deuce, a sloppy error from Federer for add-in, and then just this ridiculous cross-court forehand from Delpo. One of those, when I bring, the idea of him stepping in and just lights out. He makes perfect content. It's a winner. Contact. It's great content, but it's also perfect contact.
Yes.
And, he holds for 1-1 there. And then his body language picks up. His energy level picks up. his movement picks up. And, he had a bunch of breakpoint opportunities throughout this set as well. He gets that break at 3-2 for 4-2 in that game. Or I think he gets the break, at 2-all for 3-2. And that was a break he got at love. And that was, that was the first dominant game probably of the entire match on the Federer serve for Del Potro. And he just, he had served his way out of some trouble the game before that as well. But that game for me, that sequence there from 0-1 to 3-2 Delpo, that's where the match flips. And even though Federer breaks back and extends this set to a tiebreaker, from here on in, it's all Delpo.
Delpo certainly seems to have a market edge in neutral baseline rallies when they're hitting from the back. And that's a big problem because Federer is just not having a good serving day. And the commentators went back to the Wimbledon final against Roddick a few times where Federer served a massive amount of aces. And in this match, there were portions. I don't think Federer ended with more double faults than aces, but there was a point in the fourth set where that was the case. And Federer actually started this fourth set tiebreak with a double fault.
Yeah,
which he had double digits, 10, I believe.
Yeah, I think I have 14-11 and on the score sheet in front of me, but no, you're not supposed to correct the host. Yeah, it was 10. I agree with you.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. But yeah, and for Federer in that first set, I think Delpo won something like 26% of his second serve points, something crazy like that. By the end of the match, Delpo's at 56%. I think Federer just got worn down. And a point that sticks out to me, a point that he ended up winning, Delpo had breakpoint chances. It was the 5-all game, and a couple of big forehands from Delpo, a couple of big forehand returns that he started stepping into as well. It was really in this set that he started running around the backhand return, hitting more forehands, taking more chances. But he gets to a break point, and it's an ad side serve that sort of hangs, and Delpo just unloads a forehand inside in return. And Federer just barely gets his racket on it. And he ends up winning the point. It draws a Delpo backhand easy sitter into the net because the crowd erupts on that forehand. Because hearing Delpo's forehand in person, seeing that forehand as it comes off of his racket is just like few other experiences in tennis. And the crowd justifiably reacted to that. But Delpo lost that point. The thing is, that point was very emblematic of the rest of the match, that Federer came up with some incredible scrambles. But I do think Juan Martín del Potro was the first guy who, and this is why it's so crushing that we didn't get to see him healthy for a prolonged period of time, but he just wasn't afraid of Roger Federer. He just, power for power, stroke for stroke, he's like, I can hang with you forehand-wise. A young Delpo was not intimidated to play his backhand as well. He could take returns early. Yes, early on, Federer was taking time away and getting to the net, but as the match went on, Delpo asserted himself closer and closer to the baseline. And why that point's so clearly to me is an example of how this match went is Federer just wore down. Yeah, in that instance, he got his racket on that, but to have to chase down Del Potro forehands for 4 hours, that's just, there's a reason, only that the Murray match that Delpo plays in the Olympic finals, that, it was a 4 hour, just 3.5 physical, just slaughter. And it takes just this immense physical effort to overcome Juan Martín del Potro when he's playing his best tennis. And on this day, he was playing his best tennis.
He was starting, and this is arguable, but probably starting at once he saved that second set, once he broke Roger Federer, from there on, it was an incredible level, and that forehand was so much to handle, and the backhand is so solid, maybe even more consistent than his forehand. Fourth set tiebreak ends 7-4. It finishes, so it starts with a Federer double fault. It ends with a unforced error by Federer at 6-4.
Again, only one mini break of serve, and we had more drama between Federer, Delpo, and the line umpire. That seventh point where I think Federer thought the serve was out, but Delpo plays it, hits the +1 winner. He says, "Hey, I heard someone in the crowd yell out," and you really did hear someone in the crowd yell out. And again, if you have more analysis for me, was it actually out? Was it go Delpo? What was he yelling? But it was. what was crazy is after that, because it was the wrong call. But to allow a challenge just that far later, this gets back to frustrated Fed. The chair umpire a little bit lost control of this match.
No, I disagree. I think you got to let him
Oh.
challenge. I think you have to let him challenge because his Del Potro's original reaction Federer's original reaction was, wait, it was called out, right? And the chair umpire had to ask the lines judge, did you call it out? The lines judge said, no, it wasn't me. It was someone from the crowd. So Federer goes, come on, you can't let that happen. You gotta call something there. And he goes, no, I can't call anything. Federer says, well, can I challenge? I don't think the umpire can say, no, it's too late. I mean, come on.
So,
You know what I mean?
yeah, it was equal interpretation of the law. Law was applied equally to both players. And so, yeah, that's a fair point. But, I mean, it was
way late.
30 seconds late, at least. And, again, there is karma in this world. There is justice because the point ends with a Federer missed backhand down the line. Delpo goes up 5-2, holds that point. But for it to be a fourth set breaker, you kind of have to put your foot down. And then where I really say it gets out of control is because he lets him challenge. The serve is out, but they play a let. And it's just like, what's going on? And so, again, maybe I actually think the let was, in my mind, the most justified part of the call because at the end he was like, you know what, this has been 45 seconds of chaos. Let's just do it again. But had he not called the let and Delpo has to hit a second serve there, particularly with the double fault yips we saw from him earlier, that's another one of those what ifs from this match.
That's a good point. I agree with both calls. I like the let, and I like allowing Federer to challenge, and that ball was out. Let's go to the fifth set, and it wasn't very close, so there's not really things to go really deep into and dissect. But I'll say at love one, Federer, Federer serving, he misses a backhand slice into the tape. Two big second serves returns by Del Potro, and it seemed like Federer was a little bit stubborn, not afraid of Del Potro's forehand. Maybe he should have been afraid of Del Potro's forehand. At 30-40, what do we see again? Federer hits an approach shot right into Del Potro's forehand and running cross-court pass. At that point in the match, it was like it was automatic.
Yeah, again, I think what you just said sort of accentuates my point perfectly, not to make it about me, but come on, Gill, you know who it's about. But Delpo was not afraid of the Federer forehand. And again, just mentally, Federer's like, really? You want to play to my forehand? Let's do it. And then Federer, he's like, I'm not going to be afraid of your forehand, Juan Martín. And you're right. He should have been. Now, you asked a question earlier, did Federer slice enough? And I think this is where we should get into that because especially sets 4 and 5, why Federer, I think, turned away from the slice is because Delpo got his feet moving. Because instead of playing that ball as a low backhand or an uncomfortable backhand, he would get around it and hit a forehand. And again, nowadays, that inside-out, inside-in forehand combo is the Juan Martín Del Potro staple. But back then, he still did play around with the backhand more, and you talked about it, his forehand in this match, it just stands out when he starts really stepping into it, when he starts being aggressive on that side, looking for opportunities to play the forehand. That's why he started to take control of the match. And I do think for Federer, it's a combination of, okay, well, if I slice this backhand, I'm running. Like he's going inside in or he's hitting something ridiculous inside out. And then it's part B of that as well is just, this gets back to, I think mentally, Juan Martín Del Potro, even beyond what he did physically, I think he won this match mentally, which is just crazy to say.
I would critique Federer in not slicing enough because what you're saying is I think a game that Federer has to play with a lot of different players. If he's playing even Novak Djokovic, when Federer slices his backhand cross court, he does not want Djokovic, as good as his backhand is, he does not want Djokovic to be hitting inside out forehands. He wants to get it to Novak's backhand. And the same would be true with Del Potro. So you have to mix it up. You have to make sure it's good. But to get Del Potro to move inside the baseline, where he's just not quite as comfortable hitting low backhands. I just don't think that Federer was putting Del Potro in that uncomfortable position, and instead they were slugging it out like two heavyweight boxers trading right hooks. And Federer is going to lose that game against Del Potro. It's something I think he figured out later in his career. But at the same time, world number one, the peak of Federer's dominance, it's coming to an end, but he's still there. Maybe a little bit of an arrogance with his tactics.
So I'm going to push you on this. I'm glad this is where it's going to have a fun debate, because you talked about the slice getting Del Potro closer to the line and getting him, in uncomfortable positions. I disagree. I think why Del Potro had success was because he got closer to the baseline, because he made it a slugfest. And, to say Roger Federer is going to lose a slugfest against anyone in tennis history, 99.9% of the time you're going to take Roger Federer to win a match between two heavy hitters, between two guys who use precision and aggression to win their game, because you could argue he's the best to ever do it on the men's side in terms of his aggression, in terms of the way he's able to move forward and take balls early. And that Delpo was able to beat him at his own game. Like, to me, you're right. There was a little bit of arrogance. I completely agree with that point, because Federer stuck to, no, I'm going to keep hitting forehands big. I'm going to keep trying to find that inside in myself. And that's where we saw a lot of shank forehands from Federer in this match. But, I do think, to say it speaks to the level of performance from Del Potro that he beat Federer, this Roger Federer who was something like 27 at the time, maybe 28. Roger Federer at this point 28. To beat him at his own game, it was incredible, because if looking back on the match, if I say to you, what were the sequence, the most frequent sequence of points that each guy was winning? For Delpo, you'd say he hit a couple of blistering forehands, one of which eventually Roger just couldn't return. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, you'd say for Roger, well, he made a couple of responses to blistering forehands from Del Potro, got him stretched to the outer thirds, changed direction, and sort of survived and was able to grind Del Potro down. Federer doesn't win matches he can win matches as a grinder, but you just so rarely hear that. And I just think he had to play big. He had to play aggressive, because he wasn't finding success grinding Del Potro down. And that's why I think he abandoned the slice backhand a little bit, because it just wasn't working for him.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it plays a big role in their matchup eventually. I think
sure.
And the backhand got a lot weaker for Del Potro, but I think Federer enjoys bringing a tall 6'6" big hitter, enjoys bringing them not inside the court where, they're on top of the baseline, because Del Potro is perfectly comfortable there. I'm saying bring him into no man's land with that short chip, like he did to Djokovic at Wimbledon, for example, when he almost got the best of him in 2019. Djokovic hates having to go inside the court to hit a low backhand. So I think if he utilized that shot a little bit better, that would be one of my main critiques. But at the end of the day, one of the major things, and let's just skip ahead and say Del Potro saves a break point at 2-love 30-40. I think one of the more underrated shots of the match was a nice heavy cross-court backhand by Del Potro that drew an error. And after that, it was kind of smooth sailing, easy holds for Del Potro, loose game at 2-5 by Federer. At the end there, gave Del Potro the 6-2 fifth set victory and the championship. And in my description of that, I forgot where I was going. So I don't know if you had any major takeaways in the fifth set. I'm sure I'll remember where I was going in a moment.
No, for me, the fifth set was all Del Potro. It was just fascinating to see him because Roger beat him in 5 sets, as you mentioned at the top of this, in the French Open semifinals, and Roger beat Andy Roddick in a dramatic 5-set thriller at Wimbledon. And this gets why, again, to see Roger Federer worn down, it was a testament to Juan Martín Del Potro. And I actually think Del Potro won this match twice. And here's my take for you. Here's what I mean. First championship point. Del Potro hits a cross-court forehand that was going to be a winner. You could see it on Federer's face. You could see by looking at his footwork, and I paused it at the time to see, what it looked like when it came off the racket. And it clips the net tape, and it gives Federer a second chance. And Federer had some ridiculous pickups during that point as well, but That ball doesn't hit the net tape. Delpo wins the match 4, 5, 6 points earlier. I do also think, though, given the serving difficulties Del Potro was having, not difficulties, but the tentativeness he was displaying on serve, so much better for him to get to break to win the tournament. And I think McEnroe points that out as well, than for him to have to hold. But again, physically, because this gets into the what if category. He's 6'5", 6'6", whatever it is. They say he's the tallest man to ever win a Grand Slam. And honestly, the content I'm looking for is give me Goran Ivanisevic, Del Potro, and Cilic all standing side by side. I want to know who's actually taller between the three of them. But if this was the physical specimen we got to see from Del Potro, a guy who could grind a little bit, playing 6 feet behind the baseline because of his reach, his length, he could get to a couple of extra balls. The fact that you can just tell, and he still runs around the forehand well, but when he wanted to run around the forehand and snap a ball off, he could just do it significantly easier when he was 20 years old, as so many of us can, obviously. But that to me is, when I think about this fifth set, all I started to think about is what if, because at no point in this match, and the difference between this and Agassi Rafter, I thought I knew Rafter was going to win the whole time, but I wasn't 100% sure. This one I knew for sure that Delpo was going to win. But I really tried to watch this match and think to myself, okay, is there any point where I thought Roger Federer is going to run away with this match, where he's just playing significantly better? And had he broken for 2-0 in the second set, I would have thought that. I would have thought, okay, he's going to run away with this one. But given that he served in the 40s, first serve percentage-wise in the first set, he wasn't playing well. Del Potro was playing tight. The entire match was on Del Potro's racket, in my opinion. And, I asked you when we did the Rafter Agassi match, did the right player win the match? And in that one, I didn't think so. I really thought Agassi was the better player throughout the duration. In this one, as great as Roger Federer was, and he still was really good in this match. Like, again, the idea that one of the other takeaways is to say Roger Federer is a better tennis player now than he was in 2009. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. Like, you're just physically incorrect. The scrambling he does, he was willing to play defense against Del Potro. He would not be willing to do that now. But all I could think about watching this fifth set is what if. Just what if Delpo had stayed healthy? Because then would it even be a big four, big five? No, I just think so many I think he's a guy who would have won multiple Grand Slam titles if healthy.
I look at the match a little bit differently, because I think that Federer probably should have been up, like 6-2, 6-2 in a hurry here. And it didn't happen because Federer couldn't make a first serve and couldn't convert on a break point. So I think there was a point in the match where it flipped and Del Potro stole the show, and there's not all that much Federer can do besides the fact that he continued to have an atrocious serving day. I don't think Federer really had his A game. But other than that, the takeaway was Del Potro's baseline game completely took over. But that's the technicality I'll get you on, is I think if Federer was sharper in the beginning, it would have been 2-0, and Del Potro wouldn't have even know what hit him.
You do have to wonder, did Roger Federer wear down? Because the emotion of winning the French Open, the emotion of the 5-set match at Wimbledon, surpassing Pete Sampras, and he won Cincy that year, but to go to try and pass Bill Tilden's record again, just another record, did that start to wear on him? And a lot of times during the match they flipped to Mirka, and Mirka just looks so nervous throughout the duration of this match. And, you can only, again, body language Dr. Alex Gruskin checking in here. But you could just tell there was a tentativeness and just, Roger Federer, I think 2009, he still finishes the season as the number 1 ranked player in the world. He goes on to make the semifinals of the year-end finals. Overall, he 7 titles in 15 events. But of all of the seasons he ends as the world number 1, this is probably the least successful, which again, still crazy successful, but the least successful of the group. And I think this match signaled the era of Roger Federer's dominance, not the era of Roger Federer, because obviously he is a part of the big three, but the era of it being just him, of him just being a cut above everyone else. That mystique ends at this match. This is the end point of that narrative arc.
A great transition, bingo, because I was going to go here. There is a tendency for tennis players. We saw it happen to Novak Djokovic. We saw it happen to Andy Murray. when you reach career milestones, when you do it, when you reach that pinnacle, there's normally a hangover. And this match might have been a slight Roger Federer hangover, because you look at how he reacted to losing the final against Nadal in the Australian Open, literally crying. Man, was there just a fraction of lacking in desperation from Federer in this match? I don't think that he was really problem solving out there. And then I think in the fifth set, something was missing about it's not like he wasn't fighting, but he didn't seem like the sky was falling and he had to do whatever he could to possibly figure out a way back into this. He looked a little bit resigned. And I just wonder if emotionally this is an outlier, because he had accomplished so much in the last couple months. Man, this happens to everyone. The motivation takes a little bit of a dip when that happens.
Yeah, so what's like everything else he does, of course, his hangovers are just better than everyone else's, because he goes on in 2010, as you mentioned, and wins that Grand Slam at the Australian Open to start out the season. But I think unequivocally the answer has to be yes. I mean, for him he goes finals, then wins the Australian Open, but then quarterfinals for the first time since the 2004 French Open at the 2010 French Open. Think about how many matches he had played over the past, 7 years prior to that 2010 season and leading up to this U.S. Open. I mean, he's playing about 80 plus, 90 plus matches over the course of, 6, 7 seasons. He's making deep runs at all of these events as well. It's not just one in, one out. He's playing deep, and the emotional wear down that takes. And of course, coming back from that 2008 Wimbledon loss and to just the emotion of the 2009 season. I mean, we talked about it so at length earlier, but again, for him also to have to play back-to-back, that it was a Monday match. Because he runs out of juice in the fifth set. I think that's something you have to mention there. But is it an emotional wear down? Is it a physical wear down? Is it a combination of the two? I do think so. But I do, you go back to the pre-match interview. He was cocky coming into this one. You go to the fact that you could tell he thought in his head, I'm hitting a tweener on this ball, that when Delpo hits the bump lob over him in set number 2 and he goes over the shoulder, he let the moment get to him. He didn't adjust his first serve until midway through the third set, really, not until he went down a break even in that third set. And because he was stubborn, because he was like, you know what? No, this has been working for me since the French Open. This is what works. Del Potro can't beat me. And he just didn't adjust. And, Roger Federer adjusts. That's his game plan. That's his MO. No one outthinks Roger Federer on a court. And it's not that Del Potro outthought him. Del Potro just wore him down.
I don't think Federer really changed anything here, to be honest. And the first serve percentage, just so we can put a number on it, for the match was 50%. Just to kind of support also what you've been saying about this maybe being the end of the era of Roger Federer's complete domination. After the Australian Open in 2010, that marked his 18th major final in 19 majors. That is a mind-blowing stat. Last question on Federer, then we'll go to Del Potro. He's only made the final, Federer, once in the next 9 U.S. Opens. Keep in mind, he, coming into this match, had won 5 in a row. I will throw in the caveat that he missed the entire tournament in 2016. What can you attribute that to? Just the sudden change in Federer's success in New York.
Well, 2010, 2 match points blown against Djokovic. 2011, 2 match points blown against Djokovic. The aura of invincibility for him at this event snapped at the 2009 final. And I do think, because he lost to Del Potro in the 2009 final, because he didn't win that one, the fact that he blew match points against Djokovic in back-to-back U.S. Open semifinals gets just thrown out the window as a factoid. No one even thinks about that anymore because, when you think about blown opportunities for Federer, you obviously talk about Wimbledon this past year, and then you talk about, that Delpo match when he was up, 2-1, and he should have had that one. I think it gets overshadowed. But you also have to keep in mind, and, we don't have to do this right now, but, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, Stan Wawrinka, even Marin Cilic, they all or I guess take Cilic out of that group, but he had to compete with 4 guys who were all 5 years or more younger than him, all entering their primes. Again, Novak Djokovic, in my opinion, is the best hardcourt player, certainly of the 21st century, if not in tennis history. And, I'm not going to, Don Budge was really good, and so was Pacho Gonzalez. But, again, for me, it's Novak Djokovic is the guy to beat. And I think that's why you look back at, he made the final in 2015, but he lost to Djokovic in 4 sets. I think Djokovic was just the better player in that match. I do think 2009 was the last chance Fed had to win a U.S. Open. And he came up short. And after that, as I've mentioned, the aura of invincibility was gone. 2010 is a really good Nadal season. And, I think Nadal goes on to win the French Open. He ends up winning Wimbledon as well. And then he wins the U.S. Open after he comes back from injury. And then it's Djokovic time, 2011 to 2015. The guy is just too good. So it's just I don't think it's anything for Roger Federer. I don't think, his play did drop off, but it's not his fault that simultaneously 2 of the other greatest players in tennis history and, 3 of maybe the 10 best in tennis history happened to be playing alongside of him just after his prime.
Yeah, I agree with you. A little bit of bad luck and Djokovic getting a lot better in the early 2010s. I would also add that the court got a lot slower. There was a point in time where the U.S. Open was the fast hardcourt slam and the Australian Open was slower. That's completely reversed now with the U.S. Open playing quite slow. And I also think that Federer has not been very healthy heading into the U.S. Open. Really, year after year after year, there's something bothering him by the time he gets to New York. Switching over
for the record, I just want to say that last thing, that's a perfect point as well. He's just not as healthy year in, year out as he once was. I very much agree with that.
So Del Potro, when he wins this tournament, is the only major winner outside of the Big Four in a span of 35. So there was this sense that, okay, here's the breakthrough. This is the guy. It didn't happen. In 2020, he got to a career number 4, I'll save that. Got to number 4 in 2010. Injured his right wrist that year. Keep in mind, every injury I'm about to rattle off is a major injury where he missed extended periods of time.
I'm about to cry. This is going to be brutal.
I know. So here I go. Again, every injury, it's like 6 months to a year and a half. Big-time injuries. Right wrist in 2010. Left wrist in 2014. He had just gotten a number 4 in the world again. Huge layoff after this left wrist injury. Comes back, injures his knee in 2018. Now he comes back in 2019 at Queens. This is the most gruesome of the bit. We all saw it happen. He fractures his kneecap in 2019. So 4 major injuries where he's going right wrist, left wrist, and then I don't know if it was 2 different knees. I think it might have been the same knee. But regardless, Del Potro, every time he worked his way back, and he did, even with a slice backhand, he got to number 3 in the world, essentially, which still blows my mind. An incredible accomplishment. Got back to the U.S. Open final in 2018, where he lost to Novak Djokovic. But the injuries just stopped him from really reaching the rhythm, and what he could have been never really came to fruition.
Yeah, and I think, again, this sort of goes back to where we were at in 2009, and it was the first year, I think, since 2003 that someone not named Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal had won the most tournaments. It was Murray who won 6 that year. Djokovic had made 10 different finals, and yes, Federer ended the year number 1, but that gap was a lot closer than it was expected to be. Guys like, Djokovic, Murray, Del Potro had all closed the gap a little bit by the end of the year. Nadal, of course, still in there as well. And, given the ages of Federer and Del Potro, Nadal, Del Potro, Djokovic, Murray, they were all 20 to 23 at the time. Even Roddick was still in his late 20s, but with Tsonga having just made a slam final, with Cilic upsetting Murray to make the quarterfinals here, there was this nucleus of young players, and it was just a matter of who do we think is going to break through first. And again, Djokovic did it in 2008, but then there was a gap until he wins his next title. When does that come? 2011 Australian Open, I think, is when, or maybe 2011 Australian Open is when he wins his second Grand Slam title. But for a while there, it was Djokovic and Del Potro who were the guys with slams. No slams for Murray. He had made finals, but he hadn't won. But, no slams, no slam finals for a guy like Marin Cilic. The one final for Tsonga, but he, didn't make a breakthrough like that again. And so you started to think, just with the big match chops of Juan Martín del Potro, who, as you mentioned, after this result, I think he went on to make the final at the year-end tour events. And for him, that was another big breakthrough. And I think he ended up beating in that event Federer. As you mentioned, Federer again. He beat Verdasco 7-6 in the third to move on. He beat Soderling 7-6 in the third to even get to the finals. It felt like at the end of 2009 that we saw a guy who was going to be in the upper echelon of tennis. And, I like to joke around that, how many slam titles would Federer really have if Joaquin Johansson would have just stayed healthy? But you really do wonder, because it's Delpo. Here's the group of guys who, if they're playing their best tennis, they can just straight up beat a member, and I'm going to say it painfully, the big three. If Murray plays his best, he can just beat them. If Stan plays his best, he can just beat them. And if Del Potro plays his best, as we saw him again, the Olympics 2016, his run to the silver medal was one of the most inspirational runs that I can remember in my tennis life.
Yep.
And
Djokovic wanted that so badly.
Exactly, and he beat both Nadal and Djokovic in that match in that tournament just to get to the finals. And that's not even a healthy Delpo, but that just shows his power of will. And especially after this, because you watch a Delpo match and he does seem fearless at this point of his career, right? No stage is too big, and you wonder how much of that dates back to the confidence he gained after winning this final against Roger Federer, and just the amount of slams he could have won. I think, not to equate what happened between the two at all, but, probably on the women's side, the biggest what if in tennis history is what happens if, tragedy doesn't strike Monica Seles, that she doesn't get stabbed in 1993. She was, 20, 21 years old at the time. She had won 8 majors already. Would she have been able to rival Steffi Graf? How would both of their slam counts be adjusted subsequently? No. I think the biggest what if, certainly in modern tennis memory, and again, I don't remember the players who got injured in the 80s, but it has to be Juan Martín del Potro, because we actually saw him win a slam at the age of 20, and it wasn't just a one-shot wonder. He made the finals in the year-end finals. He had made multiple quarterfinals at the Masters level in the run-up to the event. And just what would have happened had he stayed healthy, been able to hit that two-handed backhand, been able to move like he did, as rangy as he was, and the way the courts have slowed down, just the opportunities he would have had to just unload on inside-out, inside-in forehand combos. His game ages well because it's very simple. The things he's trying to execute, the footwork behind getting around an inside-out, inside-in forehand is tough, but he knows exactly how he wants to execute. It's very replicable, but it's just crushing because obviously, we didn't get to see that, and so, it really, where he factors in is, if I asked you, would you rather have the career of Juan Martín del Potro or David Ferrer? What would you pick?
Ferrer.
Yeah, because of the longevity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, getting injured is, if I'm answering that question honestly, and I bet a lot of people, when they hear that, will say, oh, Del Potro. Mm-hmm. But, man, you want to get injured? Because it's not fun.
Yeah, you want to go over countless, how many times have you seen the Instagram video of him doing therapy?
It's terrible.
It's just so sad. And so I agree with you. I would give me the longevity of David Ferrer, who for 12 years in a row was just a staple. He's playing 17 plus events. You're going to see him do really well on the clay. He's going to do really solid elsewhere. And no, he doesn't have the upside of a Juan Martín del Potro, but yeah, it's just you can't. The first thing, even before the 2009 Open, when you talk about Del Potro, is injuries, and that's just so devastating.
It is. I mean, he had it. That and I agree with you with the group of players that you put in there. Stan Wawrinka. I think Del Potro has proven to be a little bit more consistent than Stan when he's healthy. I really do like to compare him. What if to Andy Murray? Because I really do think that they could have been similar, and I think there could have been a semblance of a big five. And I don't think Del Potro would have been Djokovic, Nadal, or Federer, but I really do think he could have been Andy Murray.
So it's interesting you say that because one last factoid for you in terms of the head-to-heads for Del Potro at this point in his career. You talked about he was 0-6 versus Federer coming into this match. Obviously, he beats him there. He beats him at the World Tour Finals. Gets a couple of wins under his resume. He was 3-4, I believe, against Nadal at this point of his career. He had lost the first 4 encounters, but as you mentioned, had won the last 3. It is interesting, though, because against Djokovic, he was 0-3 through 2009, and against Murray, he was 1-5 through 2009. So it's an interesting comparison because you're, in terms of the upside, yes, Juan Martín Del Potro at his best, although 2016 Olympics aside, where my boy Murray took him, he could certainly, 3-4 majors, that was very much within the realm of possibility for a healthy Del Potro. But I think the biggest thing is just the hard court impact, right? How good he clearly would have been on a hard court, especially, the fact that he can still win titles now, I do think is a little bit of a testament to the fact that conditions have slowed down. But imagine him with his forehand, his athletic ability, that serve that got better and better and better. And it still struggles percentage-wise, but when it's clicking, it's just so good. On a slow hard court, healthy nowadays. I mean, if I said he would have won 6 Grand Slams, is that too high for you?
Yes, because of Andy Murray. I mean,
no, he takes him from Djokovic. Don't take him from Murray. Take him from Djokovic.
No. What I'm saying is, if you tell me that Del Potro is going to win 6 slams, the reason I'm like, nah, can't see that, Alex, is because how did Andy Murray win only 3?
Oh, good. Okay, that's a good spin. I like that a lot. Yeah, that's very fair. I mean, again, it's because Federer, Djokovic, Nadal are all ridiculous. And and I mean, who do you take? Delpo versus Rafter? Give me Delpo 30 times out of 30. And obviously with the technology, blah, 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 I get it. But just as a talent, Juan Martín Del Potro was special. That was my takeaway from this match as a whole.
He's working on a comeback. Both these players right now on the mend. Federer recovering from his knee surgery, and Del Potro recovering from his knee injury. So sadly poetic, but that's where we are right now. Anyway, Alex, this has been so much fun. Always tons of laughs when we're going back and forth, and I really do appreciate that.
Let me throw one more factoid at you. My biggest takeaway, and again, this is why Mary Carrillo deserved to it should have been maybe just her and McEnroe in the booth, although Tickenberg was so great. But Mary Carrillo, at one point, they're showing Jack Nicklaus, and then they show Jack Nicholson, and Carrillo just name drops. She goes, I was actually at Jack Nicklaus's house, and he has 3 grass courts there. And I was like, how is this not the thing we're talking about? Like, can I get a video package for the 3 grass courts in his backyard? Can I watch Jack Nicklaus play? And at first I thought they meant Jack Nicholson. And I was like, no way Nicholson has it. But then I went back and I was like, oh, they said Nicholas. Right. And that was it was a good piece of content. Gwen Stefani was in the house. It was a high level of tennis, swirling winds. It was delightful. I got to get out there someday because it does seem like it. And that we got the tidbit of what Del Potro looked like after set 3. As always, it is a pleasure to work with you because those are the tidbits that I know your fans love, and it's why I always enjoy getting together to do something like this.
I appreciate that. Let's just remind those watching where we can find your content.
Go to crackedrackets.com. You can find Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're on a YouTube subscriber binge. So if you could do that, I know super producer Daniel Westoff, it would do numbers for his health. The podcast, Great Shot Podcast, the Mini Break Podcast, the Cracked Interviews Podcast, all available wherever you listen to your podcasts. But more importantly, huge shout out to you, Gill, because, not only did we do this match, you came on our show to do something similar, as we mentioned, for Rafter and Agassi, and it was a hit. So I want to thank you for extending the favor and allowing me to come on your show because I'm a big fan. But more importantly, as you mentioned, it's just always a blast. So did that answer the question? Did I really go to Monday match?
I'm blushing now.
I was gonna say
it's a mess.
Monday match analysis is what should be the first thing you scroll into YouTube. But if you've got time for something else, throw in the Cracked Rackets in there as well.
Oh, come on. Look, there's enough space for all of us. But yeah, really glad. And let's do this again. Stay safe, stay healthy. What I've been telling everyone who's been coming on to do this with me, I hope that we can talk about more recent tennis in the near future.
Absolutely. Chag Sameah, my friend. I look forward to doing this again sometime soon.